And I'm happy to open this conference now, just coming up to 6 minutes past 10. If we're all ready, I will begin. Friends, colleagues, fellow students, co-workers in the world of astrology, on behalf of the Astrological Association, and indeed on behalf of the whole British astrological community, and myself personally, a very warm and heartfelt welcome to you all to this Europe 92 conference. It's wonderful to have you here. Bienvenue à Europe 92 et herzlich willkommen to Europa 92. As you can see from the delegates list in your folders, you've come from all over Britain, all over Europe, all over the world, and indeed even braved the wilds and traffic of South London to get here to participate in this conference. We're met here on the eve of the Uranus-Neptune conjunction and on the eve of the single Europe to help plant and give nourishment to the seeds of a larger and ever more fruitful astrology, and to encourage ever greater cooperation between the astrologers of the many different traditions, schools, nations and languages of Europe. No matter whether the Maastricht Treaty survives, we as astrologers are committed to an ever closer union, an ever greater understanding and cooperation amongst us. This Europe 92 is one of 4 such major conferences this year which have been drawn forth by the Uranus-Neptune conjunction. Firstly, at Easter, we saw the magnificent UAC, United Astrology Conference, in Washington, D.C. in the United States, which was a wonderful mixture of rich and diverse strands of European and American astrology. Then next month, the month coming, from the 2nd to the 11th of October, we will be seeing the Norwegian Double Conference, Up from the Roots and Into the Future, and that will be taking place both in Oslo and in Bergen, and also on board the ocean liner, the Midnight Sun. The cruise liner Midnight Sun. One wonders how Uranus-Neptune can you get than an astrological university at sea. One thinks that in these dark times for Europe, that the image of the Midnight Sun cruising with all these astrologers aboard is a wonderful image and an awakening to a new vision of things. That's Oslo. The final conference of this year, before the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, will be in the heart of Europe in Berlin, which takes place from the 30th of October to the 1st of November. And how suitable it is that this Uranus-Neptune conference is taking place in Berlin, the capital, in the heart of Europe, in the capital of a country which was born with the Sun and Midheaven square Uranus conjunct Neptune. This Sun and Midheaven square Uranus conjunct Neptune in the United Germany chart symbolizes a nation whose task is to struggle to realize the integration in nationhood of the values of both right and left. To integrate within the nation of Germany Uranus' spirit of free enterprise and individual values with Neptune's spirit of social and collective awareness, vision and compassion. We can have no doubt that in Germany, in undertaking this huge task of integrating Uranus and Neptune in its own body, will be blazing a trail for Europe as a whole and the rest of the world. For let us be under no illusions. It is the integration and development of the ideas of this paradoxical pair of planets, Uranus and Neptune, that we are especially called upon at the present time to undertake. At this point, I hope that those of you who do not share the Neoplatonic model of astrology will forgive me if I suggest that in this series of astrological conferences that I've just enumerated, we are seeing the vivid archetypal manifestation of the way in which the ideas of the time, Uranus-Neptune, through the instrumentality of the planetary cycles of Uranus and Neptune, are forever directing and shaping and sustaining our world. For from an astrological viewpoint, we cannot but see these four major conferences and the other manifestations of heightened astrological activity around the globe as all part of the same process, the same awakening and questioning. They are all signatures of the imminent rebirth of the astrological model, the rebirth of the astrological paradigm, the astrological way of looking at the world. Now we get to this weekend in London. This weekend here in London is part of this process of rebirth. We're here to listen to experience, and to contribute to the growth and development of astrology and the astrological perspective, and to bring together the many different streams and traditions of astrology throughout Europe. The particular perspective of this conference this weekend is Europe. We are focusing on the riches of astrology in Europe. This is not because we want to be insular or chauvinist. On the contrary, there is a vast wealth of astrology out there, both ancient and modern, in India, Tibet, in the Far East, in Australasia, and North and South America, and elsewhere, which deserves and will certainly receive our most ardent attention on other occasions. But we are focusing on the European experience and the European dimension because one essential element of healthy growth is the development of a sense of one's own unity and unique identity, the process which Jung called individuation. Every entity, every being, needs to find its own unique identity and purpose if it is to work and cooperate effectively with other entities. This is true at all levels. This is what happens within our own bodies. Each cell in our body is made in the image of the first original cell from which we were created. Yet each cell in our body has its own unique part to play. So it is in astrological terms. We each contain all the same planetary principles, yet we each express each of these principles in our own unique way. So equally it is with every unity, with every entity, every nation, every organization, every astrological association. Each has its own part to play in the larger. For us all as astrologers, as much as citizens, the single Europe is a new level of unity, a new entity, a new level of consciousness which is coming into being. We are here this weekend to begin to explore consciously what this means to us as astrologers. We're here to begin to get to know better the many different strands of astrological knowledge, astrological experience, and practice which are being developed by different astrologers here in Europe. We're here to listen, to meet and to discuss, and simply be with each other, to expand our astrological consciousness, to open doors into other dimensions and perspectives of astrology. We're here to celebrate and to enjoy and the beginnings of a larger astrology, a larger European astrology. It is a larger astrology which can in turn go out, having found its unity, can go out to meet and enrich and be enriched by other astrologies around the world, around the planet. Europe contains a vast array of different schools of astrology, different astrological groups, associations, organizations, different journals, different national astrologies. Many of you will have seen these different astrologies, different groups, different journals listed in the 1992 Urania Trust Astrology Guide, and I think all of us who saw that list when it was finally published were astonished at the extraordinary richness and diversity of astrology in Europe. The sheer number of different active groups and schools and journals is quite remarkable, and until now these have very much been locked behind the language barrier. The message of astrology at this time of Uranus conjunct Neptune is, as it always has been, unity in diversity. Unity in diversity. And I think that in a sense is the sort of watchword for this weekend. Unity in diversity. Each unique Uranus individual contributing fully from itself towards the collective vision, Neptune. I think it is important to recognize and remember that whoever we are, we all have our own unique part to play in unfolding astrology. We all have our own unique part to play. There's no room in astrology for clones. We have to actualize our own contribution. And that, of course, our unique part to play, that, of course, must include those who are most critical and indeed those who are most hostile to astrology. They too have their part to play in helping us clarify our ideas, clarify our experience, our practice and our devotions. As astrologers, whether our approach is scientific, artistic, pragmatic or mystical, we will undoubtedly be working with and working out the seed ideas of this Uranus-Neptune conjunction for a long time to come. In fact, I suppose if we're literal about it, we will be working out the seeds of this Uranus-Neptune conjunction for at least another 170 years. There's a thought. Indeed, of course, we are beginning to work out this Uranus conjunction. We have been for at least 2 or 3 years now. We've seen the collapse of Eastern Europe. We are seeing the coming together of left and right in political terms. And we are, of course, seeing this coming together of Uranus-Neptune specifically here today and here in this chart for this opening of the conference. The time we have chosen for the conference, which, as I said, was 5 minutes and 45 seconds past 10, or perhaps I should rather say the time that has chosen us, for clearly when one goes to elect a chart, one finds in fact the chart has chosen itself, not just for, well, somehow, Dennis may be telling us more of that, but somehow the chart chooses us, doesn't it? It's set for today, Friday the 4th of September, at just before 10:06 a.m., and let's have a look at some of the main features that we are, as it were, ensouling, that we are bringing into being with this conference. We see the midheaven is at 27:55 of Cancer, and that is actually exactly conjunction the Sun-Moon midpoint of the Astrological Association. And it is coming to the opposition in the sky of Saturn and Uranus. Sorry. I must obey my instructions. I've got to put this. Oh well. Sorry, no, that's not so good, is it? It's here, the midheaven, with the Sun-Moon of the Association, opposite the Saturn-Uranus midpoint of the moment, which Saturn-Uranus, which is the professional astrologer, very much to do with astrology. And the midheaven is also coming square the Sun-Moon midpoint at 29 of Libra here. So very much a Sun-Moon, very much a wholehearted commitment to astrology, to being here. It's a wholehearted commitment to astrology in a spirit of focused attention. The ascendant is at 21:07 of Libra, is coming to the exact conjunction of the midheaven and Jupiter of the Astrological Association, which are at 21 Libra. And incidentally, for those of you who don't well know it, the Astrological Association was formed only about 300 or 400 yards from this college here in 1958. Europe 92 is a project dedicated to bringing out the AA's own dedication to expanding international cooperation and collaboration and consciousness of the astrological wisdom. In other words, this conference is designed to bring out the Astrological Association's natal Jupiter midheaven in Libra, quintile Uranus. This ascendant here, we will see, is exactly at the midpoint of Uranus midheaven. Uranus midheaven midpoint has often been described as the yoga midpoint. It's awakening to personal consciousness. It is also with the midpoint of Jupiter-Pluto. Jupiter-Pluto has a great deal to do with social regeneration. We're here to help further awaken ourselves, to awaken our community and the world. The ascendant square Saturn node midpoint suggests both our connection and reconnection with traditional knowledge, but it also perhaps reflects our sense of loss that at this weekend Howard Susportus, who was with us, has obviously gone elsewhere and has other work to do, and he cannot be with us this weekend. And that is the Saturn node aspect. We will be having a memorial service to Howard on Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. here in the Great Hall. In the chart here we have the Sun in 12 degrees of Virgo, which some of you will know is one of the degrees given by Charles Carter as a degree to do with astrology. 12 degrees is one of about 4 or 5 degrees that are specifically related to astrology. 12 degrees Virgo Pisces. It's in the 11th house, which is clearly the house of friends and colleagues and friendship and cooperation and all those Aquarian ideals. And here we see that it is applying to the trine of the Uranus-Neptune. And if you remember, trines are to do with what delight us, what motivates us, what moves us. It is our awareness of the beautiful, Sun trine Uranus-Neptune, focusing ourselves on the beauty of Uranus-Neptune, awakening to a higher ideal of seeing, if you like, the mystical aspect of astrology, Uranus, of awakening to the larger vision, Neptune. Mercury is also very closely 135 degrees from Neptune and Uranus, and Mercury-Uranus, Mercury-Neptune is the articulation, the communication, the translation of these ideas into words and to their communication. The Sun is exactly, and I'll see if I can get this on, the Sun today is exactly on the midpoint of Mercury and Jupiter. Remember, Mercury with his caduceus is the psychopomp, the leader of souls, while Jupiter we associate with philosophy and wisdom. This is a combination which Ebertin associates not only with wealth of ideas, with oratory, with talk and talk again, but also associates with health and healing. Mercury, Jupiter, health and healing. And healing and wholeness and health are indeed one of the streams of thought which flow through this weekend. If you look at your program, you will see there's a whole array of talks on different aspects of the application of astrology to medical matters and health. If nothing else, Mercury-Jupiter here certainly suggests communication and talk and more talk and more talk, and in many languages and in many translations. The Sun is also 45 degrees to the Venus-Pluto midpoint and to the midheaven. With this and the Libra ascendant and Venus in Libra in the 12th house, and Venus here, you see, Venus here, you can just see it here, configured with the Moon ascendant and Sun midheaven midpoints. With this picture, it is not surprising that another theme, which I don't remember ever coming up at conferences before, is repeated throughout this conference, and that is the theme of love. We've had relationships, but the word love appears in our love and joy appear repeatedly in the program. I may say, as always, these themes came to us when we'd chosen the conference. This is what people offered us. We didn't say, please speak on these themes because we have this chart. the chart has drawn these ideas forth from you. The moon in Sagittarius is close to the third house cusp, and another primary astrological degree, 18 degrees Sagittarius. That's a very strong astrological degree, and the moon and the third house, third, ninth house cusp are right with that degree. And that integrates the broad international sweep of the body of the conference. The moon is exactly conjunct the midpoints of Saturn ascendant, Uranus, Pluto, and squares the Sun-Jupiter midpoint. We will have the opportunity to think hard about astrology, question it radically, and yet also play hard. The moon's exact trine, and this is one of the closest aspects in the chart, its exact trine to Chiron in the 10th house, shows the beauty of astrology as a healing art and science for the individual and for the world as a whole. And that will certainly, I'm sure, motivate many of us this weekend. The moon is also approaching the opposition of Mars and the node on the third, ninth house cusp across the galactic center. And this should likewise fire us with enthusiasm for a larger perspective and no doubt encourage a vast amount of stimulating debate. Some of that debate may be science and art, others may be knowledge and mysticism, others Uranus-Neptune issues, individual and collective. But certainly I think Mars in the ninth square Jupiter sounds like a lot of controversy, and we hope that we will have some fun with that as well. But right across the galactic center it sounds very powerful. There are many features you will want to pick up on in this chart, but one that's very interesting for those of you who are into asteroids, the asteroid which is particularly associated with astrology is Urania. Here is Urania, and Urania is at exactly 1 minute of Capricorn. In other words, Urania is exactly on the Earth point of the chart. It's on the midpoint of Moon Uranus and closely trine Mercury. What more appropriate position for focusing on Urania's work in the world? And as you will see, there is a very strong mundane strand to this conference. We have a series of talks on mundane astrology and the application of astrology to the affairs of the world. And if any area of the world needed some help and guidance and insight and illumination, it must surely be our politicians who are struggling to try to make sense of the current Saturn square Pluto Dionysian fragmentation that is going on, and the Uranus-Neptune fragmentation that is going on in the Eastern Europe and in the Balkans. Astrology, as Dennis Elwell, who will be speaking next, is an arch Uranus-Neptune character, Aquarius-Neptune. He will no doubt remind us, astrology challenges humanity as a whole to radically review its vision of the world and the cosmos, and at the same time astrology provides us with the tools for this great task. The Sun approaches the trine of the conjunction of Uranus and Neptune, inviting us as astrologers to delight in examining our science, art and craft anew. Let us to the work, let us to this feast of astrology. Once again, on behalf of the AA and the whole astrological community, may I again welcome you most warmly here today. Likewise, may I, on behalf of us all, commend this conference to the care and protection of the One and the Good and the great high gods. For, as the great philosopher and astrologer Proclus reminds us in his commentaries on the theology of Plato, the gods lead and perfect all things in a silent path by their very being and fill them with good. So may it be.
Well, I don't have any pretty pictures for you this morning, but that chart was interesting, wasn't it? We had the Sun in Virgo, afflicted, which is the president of the association having trouble with his technology. And so how these charts do it indeed speak to us. The technicians are making me louder. Isn't that convenient? When the horizontal control starts going, you know we're in trouble. I like to keep reminding people that astrology is the science of the year 4000. And once I said this to a journalist writing a magazine article, and he replied that he'd not realized that astrology as a science went back so far as 4000. And I said, well, sorry, I mean the year AD 4000, that far-off epoch 2 millennia into the future. And in pointing to the distant future in this way, you may think, well, I'm making a trite observation that astrology will have to wait around for centuries yet to be recognized. But what I want to say is that we are already in possession of the basic elements of a future scientific understanding of the universe, of the human being, and of human life. We are already in possession of it. Our hands would tremble with awe, ladies and gentlemen, if we completely understood the true significance of the factors in astrology that today we treat as commonplace. And it's obvious when you think about it, isn't it? The significance of the planets is not going to change, although our human concept of them may. We may develop new scientific models, new metaphors. These become available to us to use in astrology. And the significance of the zodiac isn't going to change, although I suppose our understanding of what is behind the famous 12 divisions will be immeasurably expanded over the next 2,000 years. The fact that the basic building blocks are the same now as they will be in the future puts astrology in a unique position in that it gives us a window through which we may glimpse tomorrow's science today. For the astrology, you see, reality breaks down into certain fundamentals, and those fundamentals will be forever the same, which is different from the situation in other spheres of knowledge where the fundamentals have changed almost with every new century. There's no doubt that astrology is totally incompatible with the mainstreams of thought today. It leads an uneasy existence, a stranger in a foreign land. And those of us who are interested in the problems of how to validate its claims know how easily it eludes the rigorous analysis demanded by the scientific method as currently formulated. I suppose we may hope it will fit better into the intellectual framework of the year 4000. We can be certain that science in that distant epoch is likely to be as different from our present science as the science of today would be to the ancient Egyptians. And what is considered to be firmly established today may be considered a superstition tomorrow, and vice versa. Tomorrow's accepted wisdom may sound like sheer lunacy to us, so we should not instantly dismiss everything that runs contrary to our settled views, which include, may I say, the talk I'm giving this morning. In particular, the science we call astrology, if we press it to its limits, has the power to overturn what we think we know. Now, the fact that astrologers already hold in their hands the major elements of the astrology of AD 4000 must have important implications for us working today. If we are to represent astrology truly in 1992, there cannot be an unquestioning takeover of the ideas prevailing in the world of 1992. What we have to do, difficult though it sounds, is to reach forward in time to capture for today a little of the flavor of the year 4000 and its science. We have to be at the leading edge, not trailing behind. We have to place our astrology into a future framework insofar as we can discern the outlines of that framework. Therefore, it seems to me that if what astrologers have to say does not sound strange, we can be sure it is not authentic astrology. I mean, what is the test of a good interpretation of the horoscope? I used to say, half joking, that the test was how angry it made the person. It's so easy to soothe people by telling them what they hope to hear, isn't it? But the real test, it seems to me now, must be how far it puzzles the person and how far it demands a change of perspective and how far it causes a rethink of basic attitudes, or at least a retuning of them. To be authentic astrology, a reading must not be too easily understood. It must produce a little head-scratching, because, you see, from the cosmic viewpoint, everything is different. From the cosmic viewpoint, everything is different. What our life seems to be about is not what our life is really about. We think we know what our problems are, but in fact they are usually about something else altogether. And I have this reputation when I'm doing counselling. I open the session by saying, well, tell me, what do you think your problems are? So astrology helps us to define the issues of the individual life, but it has been assumed for too long that these issues can be expressed in the same language we use to chat over the teacups. Well, rather it needs a more specialized language, a language which, like the specialized language of other sciences, sounds strange at first. I'm not talking about our technical terms here, but what astrology discloses about the nature of reality. That too must sound strange. What we encounter in astrology is like a foreign language. And I'm afraid that numberless mistakes and misconceptions have arisen through the assumption by astrologers that it must be the language we ordinarily speak. We think the cosmos must speak the language in which we talk to each other over the coffee cups. But astrology is not worth much unless it helps us to perceive in a new way, and the whole object of what we're doing should be to encourage a new mode of seeing, to explain that there is another point of view in the universe from which our problems appear both different and solvable. Astrology, ladies and gentlemen, is about another point of view in the universe, to which we have to grope our way. Now, for some time now, astrology has been groping its way towards a better language in which to express its insights as it moves into the future. And happily this process seems to be accelerating, and what I'm proposing today is that we give it an extra push. Instead of endlessly repeating and rehashing what we associate with the planets, for example, we ought to give them a more searching look. We need to take our basic concepts, think about them, argue about them, clarify them. Above all, we should brace ourselves to be surprised at what we discover. We shall only succeed if our astrology gives us a little shock of surprise, unless our astrology becomes that much more strange. Now, the fact is, and this is not always recognized, the fact is that the astrology of this century would have seemed strange only 100 years ago. Only 100 years. Up to about the turn of the century, there was little awareness of the planets as abstract principles. Today, it's commonplace to speak of Jupiter as expansion and of Saturn as contraction and so on. But such ideas would have seemed incomprehensible for most of astrology's history. The astrologers of the 19th century understood the planets only in terms of their observed effects, their end results. With each planet was listed the personality traits, the kind of occupations, the kind of physique, the kind of illnesses, the type of future events, and so forth. There was no attempt up to that time to think of the planets in a causative way, no realization that they might be understood in their own terms as great principles or functions. Now, this process is not only recent, it has hardly started. And here I'm able to pay tribute to Charles Carter, who combined first-hand observation with an understanding of first principles, and thereby did much to give astrology the direction it is now taking. For instance, it was typical of Carter that when writing about the traditional values of the ninth house, long journeys, religion, philosophy, and so on, he should propose that the real meaning of the house was exploration, either mental or physical. Previously, astrologers had been struggling with how to distinguish between the long journeys of the ninth house and the short journeys that were supposed to be associated with the third house. They really did get into an intellectual tangle with this. Somebody proposed that a short journey was one that could be completed in a day. But of course, that was before Concord. Now, Carter perceived that travel and philosophy were both special instances of something that embraced them both, namely an urge to push back the horizons. There is indeed in human nature, and many animals too, an urge to explore. Now, we should be clear what this shift of thinking meant, because we need more of it. I mean, in a sense, the ships and trains and planes are themselves merely special instances of whatever underlies the ninth house, as are chapels, churches, mosques, synagogues, and so forth. What seem to be very different things are grouped under the same house, planet, or sign, and we should be able to unite them into a single concept, if only we could raise our perception to the right level. This may have happened by the year 4000, but we should be working towards it. What astrology badly needs today is a conscientious striving towards concepts that rearrange and recombine what we already know in new and more meaningful relationships. And not only what we find in the astrology books. As we read or investigate anything, we can try to fit it into the cosmic matrix, see how it relates to the planets and the zodiac, and whether that cosmic matrix may not be able to throw light on it from its own unique vantage point by suggesting other relationships. I'm saying if we put what we are studying into the cosmic matrix may help us understand better what it is we're dealing with. Let me give you a simple illustration. It's been established that each half of the brain has its own function. The left hemisphere has to do with logic and language, and we would connect that with Mercury. But how about the right hemisphere, which is concerned with non-verbal thinking and memory? It is concerned with how the sensory images of artistic creation and appreciation are processed. The right brain recognizes wholes. It has a feel for the total situation or activity. It's what we use for jigsaw puzzles and other spatial problems. As I speak to you here, your left brain is handling the words, at least I hope it's handling the words, while your right brain is picking up information through my tone of voice, my gestures, and the general context of what I'm talking about. So hopefully both those hemispheres are buzzing away at this very moment happily. Now, to me, this unifying, coordinating bias of the right brain suggests Venus. I know we tend to connect this planet with, quote, love and relationships, but relationships are really a special instance of a wider impulse towards unity, which can be as intellectual as it is emotional. Moreover, we recognize that Mercury and Venus form a natural pair of planets, because in horoscopes they're never far from the sun. They dance attendance on the sun. And the sun for me represents the creative mind that uses, in the most clear-sighted way it can, the abilities of both of them for its own purposes. In other words, there is something, a principle, which unites both these hemispheres of the brain. Now, in this way, we can arrive at new insights into what a horoscope means. For instance, does a conjunction of Mercury and Venus signify a specially close interaction between the two hemispheres, a facile interaction? But also, out of astrology, we may be able to contribute new ideas to the common fund of knowledge about the nature of the human reality. Mind you, it may be we can never hope to say the last word about these concepts. If you take the ninth house, for example, which Carter was considering, it's not only travel and religion that have traditionally been associated with this house, but also the law. But in what way can the law be an expression of the urge to explore? Well, if you consider the law as embodying ideas of right and wrong, a sense of morality and ethics, we can see that everything connected with this house can be combined in the idea of a mental or spiritual outreach. And that is a good word, outreach, for describing what happens physically, mentally, or spiritually. This is where we explore ideas and values beyond the range of the immediate facts, seek experiences beyond the here and now. This is where our reach exceeds our grasp. Going beyond the brute facts of existence, aiming at something other than mere survival, aspiring beyond the merely necessary or expedient, seems to have been the mark of human beings right from their first appearance on the planet. The zodiac symbols themselves are all meaningful, and the ninth house corresponds to the sign of the archer. The image of the centaur seems to be making a distinction between the human and the animal, and the arrow that flashes into the blue is the symbol of man's aspiration and his ability, in contrast with animals, his ability to live from a point beyond himself. Indeed, Charles Carter wrote that the ninth house was probably connected with conscience, an innate sense of right and wrong, and he noted that by equal house division, criminals tended to have difficult configurations connected with this house. The chart that Charles put up was interesting. It has the moon in Sagittarius, and it is trying to Chiron. And you'll detect a kind of a Sagittarian thing. There are no prizes offered for this, but you'll notice time and time again during this talk I'm talking about Sagittarius. The trying to Chiron is very exact. Chiron is standing on my midheaven at the moment. And I don't altogether go along with the mythological view of Chiron, as some of you may know. Chiron's style is sort of bare-faced cheek. I don't know how that translates into different languages, but a certain audacity. And so what I'm trying to say to you, I hope you will think very strange indeed, and not think that I'm trying to bolster your established beliefs. Now, in understanding the transition from symbols to concepts, I just want to glance at the evolution that has taken place in human consciousness, because this is really what astrology is going to be about in the years ahead. In the distant past, consciousness consisted of pictures, images, and there was nothing like the abstract thinking of today. I mean, go through all the books of the Bible and try to find any elements or any statements or propositions that are not expressed in terms of concrete imagery. God had to create the universe in 7 days, because there was no comprehension of an abstract time span like a geological age. In early times, the truths of existence had to be expressed in the vivid images familiar to us in mythology or in the language of parable. And young children, those of you who have young children, know that they still pass through this stage of picture consciousness. Don't tell me, show me stage, in which abstract concepts are a foreign language and a more down-to-earth imagery is needed to get the message home. Now, when you realize how the shift of human consciousness has taken place over the centuries and what it signifies, you become very nervous. I become very chironic. You become very nervous about contemporary moves to reinstate the ancient mode of understanding. For example, in the emphasis put on dreams in Jungian psychology, or the idea that mythology can still speak meaningfully to us today. Yes, the old symbols are evocative, but we are now required to go a step further. Thus, in the case of the centaur archer, we have to remember that the image was applied to some reality. It was applied to some reality, some quality or fact of existence, as the only way the ancient mind could apprehend it. Nowadays we need to approach the same reality by a more direct and unambiguous route. Modern consciousness evolved for a reason, and only if we are faithful to it shall we be able to discover something worth passing on to the unborn generations of astrologers. At this point, I'd like to let fly an arrow and hope you'll be patient with me, because it explains how I think astrology now needs to be understood and practiced. There are a number of ways of knowing, different modes of cognition. And here an old terminology is useful, the concepts of dry and moist, which we find in the doctrine of the elements. As you know, the elements fire and earth are said to be dry, and water and air are moist. Now, what do these terms convey? We need to conceptualize them. The moist situation is like dropping a spot of ink onto wet blotting paper and watching a spoonful of sugar dissolve in a glass of water. There is fusion, there is mergence, and interpenetration, a melting into one. On the other hand, the dry situation is like two billiard balls colliding, or the way a crystal grows in a saturated solution. There is a resistance to fusion, an emphasis on separation, a maintaining of boundaries. If you put your hands together, linking fingers, that is moist. If you clap your hands, that is dry. Now imagine these terms applied to different states of consciousness. Moist is a state of mind where the boundary between what is inside the self and what is outside becomes blurred. When we're closely identified with some personal situation, when we empathize or feel sympathy or are swayed in our moods by our environment, we are in a moist state. When it comes to understanding the world around us, the moist state produces an intimate involvement with whatever is out there, a participatory consciousness. A participatory consciousness. The moist state cannot distance itself from the phenomena it studies, cannot hold them at arm's length for critical scrutiny. In the ultimate moist picture of the universe, everything is one. Everything is interconnected and infinitely interacting. At one time, human consciousness was predominantly moist. There was little abstract or dead knowledge. It was alive. Consciousness was, so to speak, dissolved in the experience of the world, and dreams, myths, magic and divination were the windows of perception. But then, by natural evolution, consciousness began to swing to the opposite pole. Humans became aware of their own individuality, separated off inside their own bag of skin. They were able to put a distance between self and not self, divorce the inner from the outer, and study the world objectively. Myth and magic gave way to hard-nosed science. But there is already a feeling in various quarters that the dry mode may have gone about as far as it can. In theoretical physics, for instance, it is recognized as impossible to separate the observer from the observed. The act of observation changes the phenomena, a fact which sets limits on what can be objectively known. A new kind of participatory knowledge is surfacing there. But science is not going to throw away its great gains at the dry pole, and if there is a recovery of the moist mode, it will be a return at a higher twist of the spiral. Astrology, of course, is the ultimate expression of moistness, and a lot of time and effort has been spent by astrological researchers in trying to make its insights conform to the prevailing scientific yardsticks in which dryness rules unchallenged. Well, maybe the lack of success here is because astrology is a different sort of knowledge altogether. Among some astrologers, and Richard Tarnas, some of you may know of him or know him, Richard Tarnas has expressed it eloquently, is some astrologers have this longing to return to moistness, to revive the myths and the poetry, to adopt an experiential approach, to put the emphasis on the passivities of fate and divination, as in horary astrology, and generally to shy away from the dangerous, sharp edges of the objective intellect, preferring a cozier blend of feeling and intuition in which anything goes. But it would not be helpful to try to put the engine into reverse. We should take a hint from the data of astrology itself. The moist mode has two phases, a positive and a negative, or active and passive. This is elementary knowledge to you, I'm sure. The passive phase is represented by the signs of the water element, the active by the sign of the signs of the element air. The ancient consciousness was strongly water, but I believe our return to the moist pole should be and will be along the lines of the air element. And air has to do with associative thinking. Not thinking in the analytical and statistical way so much in vogue and which owes so much to Virgo, in which phenomena are separated out and held at arm's length for dispassionate scrutiny, but a thinking which connects and combines phenomena into patterns so meaningful and multi-leveled that they carry their own conviction. Consciousness continues to evolve, and it would be futile for it to turn back on itself. But the thought processes of today, as they concern astrologers, are only a hint of the dimensions of understanding possible as the mind evolves. And just to get a flavour of what the element air may embrace by the year 4000, accept for a moment that everything around us embodies something like a thought. Except that rather than living inside a vast machine, we may be actually on the inside of a vast mind. In that case, understanding means an ever greater intimacy between our mind and the mind stuff of the universe. The idea of thinking the thoughts of God after him perhaps comes close to it. I personally believe that what we see spread out around us, whatever we encounter in the world, is the product of a creative intelligence. A creative intelligence. And that through imaginative thinking, we can participate in the whole process whereby the manifest becomes precipitated out of the unmanifest. So therefore it seems to be that as we move into the future, consciousness will increasingly lose the dry mode and become moist again. There will be a recovery of the sense of oneness that prevailed in ancient times, but with the difference that it will be far more positive and active and geared to an evolved form of thinking, a movement of the human mind which mirrors or imitates the mind of the universe. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that this new mode of cognition could and should appear in astrology before it appears anywhere else, and must do if astrology is to be developed along the right lines. That's one way I see science changing by the year 4000. Another feature, I think, will be the recognition that nature works not so much mechanically as artistically. Artistically. Might be hard to swallow today, but I think the orthodoxy of tomorrow may include an acknowledgement that behind the realm of manifest appearances lies an unmanifest intelligence which is constantly playing with possibilities, and indeed sometimes when you look at that wonderful animal photography, not only playing with possibilities but also with a sense of humour. Now, if the cosmic process is more artistic than mechanical, we may also find a foreshadowing of it in modern physics, where the elegance of an equation is held to be a powerful argument in its favour. In everyday astrology, we encounter the same non-mechanical process in the way that the cosmos seems to explore the many different possibilities contained within some configuration to produce a single event or experience appropriate to that individual's age, circumstances, and inclinations. Behind the scenes of life, there is an extraordinary process going on. As Charles says, the cosmos, in fact, chooses the moments for things to happen. There is an extraordinary telephone exchange which is invisible to us, where constant interconnections are being made by myriad telephone operators. And this is often done with such flair and ingenuity that it seems to argue for a kind of artistic creativity at the very back of the phenomena around us. Of course, the fact that astrology involves such an essentially creative process is very inconvenient when it comes to trying to validate its claims by the yardsticks of a mechanistic and quantitative science. Here again, we can begin to do our astrology in a way that will serve as a forerunner for other sciences, because the very nature of the astrological cries out for this approach. Not only can we view the cosmic process as a triumph of artistry, but learn how to participate in it in the same spirit. I said earlier that the moist consciousness is participatory, and that our participation changes the phenomena. Well, if we visualize the heavens as a great computer, then our situation is one of being involved in an interactive program whereby our choices alter how the computer reacts to us, modifying its game plan accordingly. It's often said that the destiny of the human being is to become a co-creator with the cosmic intelligence, a co-creator. Astrology makes this possibility immediately accessible to us. It may not seem so at first. As ephemeris watchers, hands up those who brought their ephemeris with them. The rest of you are fibbing. As ephemeris watchers, we've picked up the bad habit of asking. We open the ephemeris and say, oh, what is going to happen as a result of this or that upcoming transit or progression? A question which automatically puts us in a state of somewhat spineless passivity, as if life is always something that happens to us. Well, a better question to ask is, what should we choose for this transit or progression? What should we choose? If I'm a co-creator, how am I going to use these elements the way I want? Given the whole range of conditions available, what are our preferred options? If we can identify some development that would provide an appropriate field of expression for some upcoming planetary influence and which would be desirable in our present circumstances, why should we not get what we want and have what we want? Why shouldn't we get in first with our preference and perhaps thereby block less congenial preferences? Because, believe me, ladies and gentlemen, I see this again and again. If you leave the process to itself and become a mere spectator of your own life, you can be sure that events will tend to break along the line of least resistance. What we have to do as co-creators in this marvelous universe is to create resistances and open up channels favorable to our own purposes. It means becoming proactive in relation to our stars, shaping our actions and thinking to them, and in particular allowing them to define for us the circumstances and events we are experiencing. We allow the heavens to define for us what is happening. You think you know, don't you? Believe me, you don't. Allow the heavens to define for you what it is that is happening, because what is actually happening is usually very different from what we think is happening. So after some experience here, I am sure that we're invited to take part in the crafting of our own life, and through that, the life of the whole. There is both a science and an art to this transformative process. It uses both hemispheres of the brain under the direction of the ruling principle within us, the creative sun. It is certainly not achieved by empty exhortation, and I'm afraid there is little in the current astrological literature that is of help in this direction. You will see that our fundamental beliefs all the time dictate the kind of astrology we do and the uses to which we think it can be put. And here I want to go back to the values of Sagittarius and the ninth house. We've seen that the moral and religious values associated with this house are a step beyond the given and belong to an overview of what life is all about, the big picture. Over and above the unambiguous actualities of existence, about which there can be no disagreement, is a search for meaning, and at that level, disagreements abound. Because here we all are. Here we all are, ladies and gentlemen. We're all living in the same world, and yet a different universe walks around under your hat and under mine. We're all living in the same world. Each of us coming to different beliefs or opinions about it, and we're not forced to these views by anything in the facts. In a very real sense, we are creating both our beliefs and our unbeliefs. So the ninth house actually, you get your horoscopes out, tells us something about the person's opinions, but not necessarily what they are. They can change after all, but more about the process of opinion forming. We can learn how much the person relies on opinions or unprovable beliefs, and so forth. I suppose the criminals must be a pretty self-opinionated bunch, which may be sufficient to account for Charles Carter's observation about the ninth house and conscience. I'm sure criminals know that they're right. Not only criminals, may I say. The ninth house, anyway, and its sign Sagittarius, together with its natural ruler Jupiter, tells us how the individual explores the various options available to arrive at his or her private belief system. Now, at this point, I invite you to explore an avenue with me. At this point, if we take the data of astrology seriously, our attempts to think constructively about this letter in the cosmic alphabet concerning Sagittarius, the 9th house, and Jupiter may leave us mystified. You see, the signs representing the 4 elements of fire, earth, air, and water seem to undergo an evolution, with the last of each trio standing for the apex or peak of that element. So here we have Sagittarius as the most evolved member of the triangle of fire. This element begins triumphantly with Aries, the power to propel ourselves into purposeful action, and reaches its second stage in Leo, the power to create joyfully, giving out from the store of our own vitality and thereby replenishing it. Then we come to Sagittarius, which at first sight must seem a very tame climax to all the enthusiastic doing and creating associated with the fire element. The other fire signs seem so brimful of animal vitality. But opinions and beliefs, in comparison, these seem so anemic, so arbitrary, so provisional, so lacking in the primal force associated with fire. What began as pure and uncompromising energy seems to fizzle out in some sort of academic debate or barroom argument. Yet if we take our astrological data seriously, we know this cannot be so. What we believe about the world must in some way be of the utmost importance, the pinnacle of our powers of self-direction and creativity. And so we find ourselves being drawn by the logic of astrology towards the idea that beliefs are a dynamic force. After all, the name for positive or hopeful belief is faith, and faith is supposed to be able to move mountains. We can learn a great deal through the simplicities of astrology. Every cosmic factor is what I call a holon, H-O-L-O-N. That is a unity or whole in which everything belonging to that unity is inescapably connected. Finding out why seemingly very different things should belong to the same planet or sign can lead us to quite new insights. Thus, in relation to the 9th house, we note that Jupiter is the planet of liberty and freedom. Liberty and freedom. It is also the planet of diversity, of multiple possibilities and options. It has also been called the planet of wisdom. Wisdom. The scenario here is that liberty implies that a number of genuine options must exist to choose from, and where there are genuine options to choose from, then the question of the wise choice becomes paramount. That is all part of the Jupiter holon. So from what I know about Jupiter, I can easily accept that we have a genuine option to believe almost whatever we like about the fundamentals of our reality, and indeed that this is the one area which most of all reflects the relative freedom which humans enjoy over animals. And because of the element of fire, because it always involves a purposive outward radiation, I conclude from that not only do we have the option to say what life is about, but whatever we say it is about, then that is what life tends to become for us. Thus, we are continually projecting our own reality from within. In Jupiter terms, our world is ourself expanded. Of course, we can't be certain what the ultimate meanings of life are, and each of us has to make what's called a best bet based on the little we know. I wonder if this is why sporty Sagittarians love a bet. We all philosophically have to make a best bet based on the little we know. But if we can't know for sure, why not, if I may be chironic, why not adopt beliefs on the basis of their power to enhance life? Maybe if we are truly creating our reality, we should decide what kind of reality we would like to inhabit and adjust our beliefs accordingly. All the options are genuinely there. If our beliefs are not life-affirming, we had better work to change them before we find them spread out around us as actual circumstance. These effects of our belief, may I say, I'm watching the time, may be more decisive than we can yet understand. In one of his lectures, Rudolf Steiner said that it was only in modern times that human beings have become exposed to the full consequences of their beliefs. And he even gave a date, which was 1897, from when the game started to be played for higher stakes. You see, for Steiner, the ultimate destiny of man is to become a self-creating creature. And he wrote, "The souls of men are transformed into the ideas they form of themselves. This development was part of the wise guidance of worlds, in order that the human being may attain full and free consciousness of the self. The gods were bound to make it possible for man to become what he makes of himself. What man thinks himself to be, that he is obliged to become." And this is the ultimate projection, I think, of fire. Now, as astrologers, we have to be more aware of how our unproven assumptions and beliefs dictate the kind of information we get from the charts we study, because these overbeliefs of ours may have been carefully thought out, or they may not. What is certainly true is that if we change our preconceptions, our astrology changes, and therefore there is scope for experimenting with different assumptions to see which are the most fruitful. There are different schools of thought in astrology, as you know, and these seem to owe more to the ready-formed opinions about life and the universe that each of us brings to the subject, rather than anything derived from astrology itself. And we're always in the danger, and our clients are exceptionally in the danger of foisting our all too human desires and prejudices onto the face of the heavens. Thus, one concept we might apply experimentally to see how astrology reacts to it is that the universe is basically friendly to us, and that everything therefore possesses a positive intent. Well, now, given this premise, the planets are not the blind and sometimes destructive forces they have sometimes been assumed to be, and they certainly would not be capable of the petty spite and malice often attributed to them. Nature, you see, never works for failure. Nature never works for failure, and you are created to be a successful something or other, or at least a successful human being. So it is possible to see a positive intent at the back of life, although, of course, there may be mistakes and misfires, false starts and dead ends, where humans make a mess of things through ignorance, a lack of maturity, or whatever. If the system in which we are enclosed has a positive intent, it means I can think of the birth chart as the symbol of the good the cosmos strives to enact through this person. The chart signifies the value of the person and how he or she is intended to contribute to the whole. If you can imagine it, we are all like cells in the great body of being, each with our own part to play. Or you might say we are all atoms of God. I think it is a mistake to adopt a too personal and too introspective view of the chart, investing our feelings and conflicts with too much significance. Our sole justification for existing may be the extent to which we are able to mediate into earth life that range of cosmic values to which we are each specifically attuned by the act of our birth. Yes, of course, there may be difficult configurations in the chart, and they will indeed signify difficult conditions. But if I start from the concept that these conditions are in place in order to develop certain gifts, certain sensitivities, a certain awareness or type of consciousness, then I interpret them differently, and in my view more accurately. In other words, I see a purposeful intent, probably lying still in the future, in the chart, and all the situations or experiences connected with it. A man may have an afflicted moon in the 12th house. Yes, he might have highly charged emotional problems with his mother. And some astrologers would say, well, this mother-child relationship, we will explore it, we will explore how it's influenced your relations with other women, and so on and so on. You know. But I see it differently. I see, for instance, that this man, in order to develop certain sensitivities, perhaps for work in counseling or psychology or sympathizing, needed that mother to sharpen those sensitivities for him. In other words, I see the causes lying in the future. The idea, of course, that difficult life circumstances may exist in order to stimulate the development of desirable gifts, or at any rate to promote a special kind of receptivity, is part of an overriding conviction I have that according to the astrological perspective, the causes of events lie in the future. In the usual view of things, causes lie in the past, events happen and so on. But I view the chart as the symbol of the good which is intended to be expressed through that person, and therefore as pointing to some ideal future state, probably never actualized, not unless you're going to live to be 250, probably never actualized, but a goal which produces everything that might lead up to its fulfillment by a sort of backwards causation. In other words, the horoscope signifies a process of becoming, but never actually the become, and that we humans are never quite finished, but are always moving towards a fuller expression of what is locked inside us. I used to say in lectures that the horoscope was the picture on the seed packet. I don't believe it anymore to be so. We cannot know what the picture on the seed packet is. We do know we plant the seed and watch what comes up. Well, if that belief is true, and there's no reason why it can't be adopted experimentally, we do tend to misrepresent astrology's role. Just think how it's usually attempted. The astrologer explains your chart to you. The chart shows you're like this or like that, and so on. You're expected to recognize this portrait and confirm what the astrologer says. And I call this the astrology of assent, because the astrologer looks at you and you expect you to nod, you know. It's the astrology of assent. There's no strangeness there. There's no sense that your reality might be a holy and unfathomable mystery, only guessed at by yourself. How easily you're explained away, aren't you? You've got the sun in Taurus, say you're like this. You've got the moon in Libra, say you're like that. And how simple you suddenly are. Now, the astrologer doesn't really know anything about you as an individual. She is simply retailing how the average person with this or that sort of planetary placement or aspect is expected to behave and experience life. And to my mind, even when it's attempted with an insight into the deeper regions of psychology, it is a form of reductionism which scales down your true nature to a size where it can be conveniently packaged. Those computer readings which spew out the same reading whether you're 3 or 13 or 30, no sense of becoming there. And yet I believe the horoscope is in a constant process of becoming. You are a process. And it is never too late to become the person you might have been. It is never too late to become the person you might have been. You are not a collection of character traits, nor are you a tangle of psychological conflicts. You are a continuing process, direction-orientated, and the work of astrology is to clarify that process, encourage it, facilitate it, accelerate it, and above all to see where it leads. Because this process, Sagittarius again, because this process is an exploration of yourself and the possibilities within you. And it would be the height of folly if anyone presumed to know the end of what that exploration might be, let alone attempt to circumscribe it in trivial language. Please note, I am speaking of self-discovery as a process, not self-understanding. Understanding can encase the developing person in ice. It can render our view of the person static. It can confirm the person's difficulties without showing the way out. But astrology does point to this dynamic process. It is operational, it is knowledge in action, and we find its meanings in the living exchanges that constantly take place between ourselves and our world. I don't know what kind of science you imagine astrology to be. I think it has strong parallels with medicine, and like medicine should be judged by how effectively it improves the quality of life, changes minus situations into plus situations. As an astrologer, I should not be trying to predict the future, so much as change it by knowing where the levers are. If people do not become happier, healthier, and more successful through their encounter with astrology, what is it for, ladies and gentlemen? What is it for? We hear a lot today about how to validate astrology. Well, I'm inclined to think that the only measurement worth considering is how beneficial it proves to be. That's to say, I would like to see the time when those who accept astrological input have a measurable advantage over those who don't, whether they be lawyers, doctors, whatever, a measurable advantage. And I would go so far as to assert that it is impossible, or at least very unlikely, for us to become the person we are designed to be without the expert help that is waiting to be unlocked from astrology. Self-fulfillment does not happen by itself, not properly, and I take what I would call the militant view of astrology. I want to see an astrology militant and not apologizing for itself. I say that no rival contender can further that process of self-fulfillment better than this neglected science, still so far distant from its full flowering. To sum up, ladies and gentlemen, the great need today is not only to clarify astrology's concepts, but to realize how enlarged concepts, rather than new techniques within the old confines, how enlarged concepts may dramatically change its nature and effectiveness. Pushed to its ultimate conclusion, the concepts implicit in astrology can make an outstanding contribution to the common store of knowledge as humanity advances towards the year 4000. And I'll see you there, ladies and gentlemen.